A very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and my special guest is the Chief Executive Officer of the Copyright Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, more popularly known as COSCAP, Dr. Erica Smith. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Now, we know what COSCAP stands for, but there's a long history to the institution, relatively long, more than 20 years.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the history of COSCAP, your objectives, mandate, etc.
Right. So COSCAP is what we know as a collective management organization, or CMO. Before, people would talk more about PROs, but yes, nowadays it's CMO. COSCAP itself started fully in 2000. It was incorporated in 1998. And I can go a little further back and speak about the history of collective management in Barbados, because a lot of people think it's something quite new. In fact, collective management started in Barbados in 1944. The first license was issued in 1944 to the police band. While Barbados was still a colony of the UK, the English Society, or PRO at the time, the Performing Rights Society, they were active in the region, and that included in Barbados. So it has a fairly long history. Fast forward, a lot of people would have heard of BAMSI. And BAMSI, the difference between the PRS at the time and BAMSI is that the PRS represented songwriters and music publishers, and those are the people who really own copyright as such. BAMSI was established following a new treaty, a new global treaty, which provided rights for performers and producers of recordings, or just what we would know as producers. Right. So BAMSI was established specifically to protect the rights of local performers and producers. So you had BAMSI, and that was in 1992, and you had the PRS operating simultaneously at that time. Later, and this was not just in Barbados, this was really across the region, there was a real drive to have national organizations which they thought would better represent local rights. So as part of this drive, we had what was called BACAP, the Barbados Association of Composers, Authors, Publishers, established. And again, that was specifically focused on managing the rights of local songwriters and music publishers. So at one point, we actually had 3 organizations operating in Barbados: BACAP, BAMSI, and the PRS. So as I said, regionally, there was a drive to really nationalize these activities and to really look at the development of our local music industries. So coming out of that, eventually in 2000, the PRS turned its mandate over to COSCAP. BACAP was renamed COSCAP. And at the time, BAMSI then signed administration or management agreement with COSCAP to also manage its rights. That was in 2000. In 2004, we decided, no, let's just have the one organization, because there was a lot of confusion in the marketplace, and operationally a lot of duplication. So by 2004, 2005, we have COSCAP as it now is. So what does COSCAP do? COSCAP is not a music publishing company. It is not a distribution company. Its mandate is very simple in theory. We exist simply to manage certain of our members' copyrights and to make sure these rights are licensed when they're used, and to pay our members, and I should say also our international affiliates, for that use. That's our mandate. Do we stick to that mandate specifically? No. We go a little beyond that, and most CMOs do. So we are authorized to also offer some what we call social welfare assistance. I don't know that I like the term, But essentially, that means we will do things like educational activities, offer some support to our members and also to staff. Because in this business, training is really critical. So we go a little beyond just collecting and paying out royalties. But our mandate is actually very specific. So our objective is to obviously undertake our mandate as efficiently as possible. We are a not-for-profit.
Yes.
And we really have to control our expenditure and ensure we pay out the money we collect. If not, we're not fulfilling our mandate. So that's it in a nutshell.
And from where you sit, do you think that COSCAP has been successful in carrying out its mandate objectives?
Yes. So overall, yes, I think we've been successful. Could we be more successful? Yes. So we're limited in terms of the level of success we achieve by our ability to effectively license the rights we manage. And, in some environments, so when I talk to my Scandinavian colleagues, they achieve a compliance rate of up to 90%. So 90% of the market is licensed. And for them, it's quite simple. They send out the invoice, people pay, they're able to distribute. In our environment, it is not the same. And the reality is this is a different operating context, different history, culture, and everything. But it is more difficult. So in terms of measuring our success, whilst I do think we've achieved a lot and continue to achieve a lot, I do have concerns about the difficulties in terms of being able to effectively license the use of music.
And we'll deal with that a little later. Mm-hmm. How many local members do you have, and then externally?
Okay, so locally we represent approximately 1,300 people. And I said approximately because the figure always fluctuates. Right? People come, they join, they resign, they come back. New people join every day. But approximately 1,300 persons. And this is great because we started in 2000 with 35. So we've done quite well. And that's unique membership because we represent now with the incorporation of what was BAMC, 4 categories of membership. So writers and publishers, which are copyright, as I mentioned before, and then performers and producers. Their rights are similar to copyright, but they're different. They're similar but different. So members join in each category, but in terms of unique membership, meaning excluding where people are members in multiple categories, are about 1,300. Outside of local members, we also have agreements with international affiliates. The last time I checked, there are about 180 CMOs globally representing just music rights. There are CMOs that represent other categories of rights, so visual artists, actors, etc. In music, there are 180, and we have direct reciprocals with about 60 of them. Yes. So it means that we represent rights holders in different countries, all genres of music. And of course, in terms of seeking these arrangements, we do target those markets where our music and their music is of specific interest locally.
So just to be clear, you mentioned about 1,300, but from where you sit, again, I'm sure the number should be much higher based on the number of persons in the industry.
There are, okay, but specifically we're representing certain categories within the industry. And some people are members of the English Society still. Some are with the American Society and wherever else. It doesn't really matter in that we have contracts with all of them. So we have to represent their rights as we would locals. But I have no idea in terms of what percentage of the local market we've captured. Should it be more? Probably. But I encourage people to join when they're truly active in the market, right? Because at the end of the day, we really only exist to pay you royalties, and we can only pay you royalties if your music is being publicly performed or broadcast. So when you're now starting out, unless you've achieved that, you might be able to join, but you wouldn't be generating much in terms of royalties.
Do you think that enough artists understand the importance of copyright and intellectual property? We've been hearing about it for years, but still, sometimes artists run themselves in trouble.
Right. So specifically in terms of copyright, which is the IP right, the intellectual property right that would concern our members most, the level of awareness has grown substantially since I've been at COSCAP. So they're aware of it. Do they understand? Is something else. I don't think enough of our members truly understand the business of music and how copyright works and how to really make it work for them. And this goes not only for our membership, but generally within the wider public, right? There's still a lot of misconceptions about intellectual property rights generally.
Such as, if you could give some examples.
Well, first of all, just because you own an IP right doesn't mean it has value, commercial value. That's the first thing. And this is something we try to explain to our members in particular, because yes, you own copyright, but that does not automatically mean that you own something that has commercial value. A lot of people think so, right? There are a lot of misconceptions or misunderstandings about the ownership of these rights as well, and who actually owns the rights. Without getting into a lecture on the nature of copyright, the copyright is a bundle of rights. It's not one right. And these rights are transferable. So you could have, I'm trying to think of a very simple example, but if you're a songwriter, you sign with a music publisher. More than likely, it means you have transferred at least some of your copyright to this music publisher. And therefore, the exercise of your copyright or the rights that have been transferred no longer reside with you, but with the publisher. Similarly, with an artist and a record label. And I like
we hear about that a lot. Yeah.
Yes. And also understanding that these are all different rules with different rights. So even if you wrote the song and you performed it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are authorized to exercise the rights in the song or in the recording. What will often happen is someone wants, for example, for an ad, a television ad, to use the song, they will go to the artist. And the artist will probably say, yeah, you could use the song, give me $500. And it's not really the artist's right to, grant that license. So there are a lot of misunderstandings, misinformation that surrounds copyright. Yes.
Dr. Smith, if you could just explain what are some of the risks involved in an artist not having their work copyrighted?
All right, so let's first address what is meant by having your work copyrighted. Because people always talk about, I need to get my work copyrighted. Copyright subsists in your work automatically once it meets certain requirements. Once it's a category of work that is recognized as one in which copyright subsists, so a musical work, or an artistic work, etc. So in this case, we're talking about musical works generally, or recordings. Once it's original, Once it has been what they call fixed, but let's say recorded in some format. So you have to meet some requirements. The threshold is not that high, to be honest. So it doesn't have to be a good sound. You know, it doesn't have to be anything that people like.
Right.
So then copyright will subsist automatically. So when you join COSCAP and you register your works with COSCAP, it's really to facilitate the collection of royalties. Right? So if you don't join COSCAP or a sister organization, then the biggest risk is royalties will not be collected. And this is one of those misunderstandings I spoke about, because you'll hear people call, I don't get money from COSCAP. And, you know, I hear these statements, I come and check, and are they members? No. Or they may have been active for a long time and only very recently joined. So first, you have to actually be affiliated or be a member of a CMO. The other risk is, and this is a reality, that other people will come and register the work. Now, it may have been that there were multiple persons involved, but not all of them sought to register the work. So, and this has happened where 20 years later, someone will show up and say, wait a minute, but I'm part owner of that work and I was never paid. We wouldn't know that. You know, because again, going back to those misunderstandings, there's this idea that we somehow miraculously know all the songs that are out there and everyone who owns rights in these songs and how much they own in each song. We don't know that unless you register. We wouldn't know. So there's a risk that someone or some persons may come and register works as their own and make certain claims, and we will act on that basis until we are advised otherwise. So these are some of the risks of not quote unquote copyrighting your work. In other words, registering the work with COSCAP or another CMO.
Going back to something you just mentioned, you said that, you know, sometimes you will have somebody turn up, an artist turn up and say, well, I want to register, this is my work, but 2 or 3 other parties might be involved. So obviously, I'm assuming there is some level of vetting process when somebody comes to register.
Right. So there's only so much vetting we can do. So first of all, if you come and you claim 100%, that's a bit of a red flag, because very, very few people can truly claim 100%. And we check for conflicts. So we will look for prior registrations and so on, with the same title, featuring the same persons, etc., to ensure, at least as far as we are aware, that there's no conflict. But the truth is, we can't know for sure, because we wouldn't know all the persons who were involved and whatever arrangements were made. So there's always a risk. Yeah, and it comes up, it happens. I must say it does not happen very often, but it does happen, where people will come and register, and maybe weeks later, sometimes years later, someone will make a counterclaim. The other thing we do, however, is where multiple parties are mentioned as rights holders, we ask that they all sign off on the documentation. Other things would be, if the work has been published, we would ask or prefer that the publisher notifies the registration. We can't press home on that too much, because unfortunately, in our environment, there are persons who claim certain roles, and who aren't, let's say, proficient with those roles.
You want to break that down for the public?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, there are people who will claim to be publishers, They may even claim to be managers so that they can undertake the interactions with COSCAP. And they're not properly functioning in those roles. So if we relied on them to provide us with documentation, everyone loses. And it's just one of the unfortunate realities, not just in Barbados, but in the region generally. So we have songwriters, we have artists, we have producers, engineers, and then it can get a little tricky in terms of having persons who are, skilled and properly trained or competent to carry out some of the other roles that are required within the industry. So music publishing, yes, there are some people who are registered, but what does that mean? A publisher's job is to get the song written by songwriters commercialized. So they have to get out there and shop the work. They have to have a network. They have to be known in the business. They need to know who's who to get it recorded using ads, etc. That's how song is commercialized. Unfortunately, in our environment, you get people who claim to be music publishers, but they aren't undertaking those functions. So whilst we would prefer that the documentation is done, by professionals, that is not necessarily our reality.
You mentioned earlier some artists complaining about not getting their royalties as they should. 2 points. You said in some instances they're not members of COSCAP, and then they're not entitled as well to royalties from the work. Are those the only 2 issues that you would have in a case like that?
No. So, this issue about people not getting paid, or getting paid what they think they should be paid. So let's dissect that a bit. To be paid by COSCAP, you have to be a member. And you don't join COSCAP today and get paid tomorrow. It can take as much as a year before you're paid, right? And I can explain why after. So you have to be a member. You have to actually own copyright. And the ownership shares matter. So what happens is that a lot of people will work jointly with others. So if you join, you have a work, because our threshold for membership is quite low. So you only need to have one published work. So you have one work, and maybe you wrote it with 3 other people. Immediately that means you're only getting at most, well, I shouldn't say at most because it depends on how you agree to split. But you're sharing with 3 other people. So if you have a few works and the rights are shared with other people, and these works maybe have some popularity and get some airplay, and so during crop over only for one season, because a lot of songs you don't hear after
Crop over.
Yeah. And you're only getting airplay in Barbados. We have to be realistic. You can only possibly generate so much money in royalties, and there are a lot of false or expectations, misplaced expectations about how much you can earn. I've had people come and join. They had a song, same scenario I outlined, and they talk about how I get my royalties, boy, what they can do. And I'm like, no, don't mistake this for, Ed Sheeran, global artist. But seriously, the expectations are generally unrealistic.
Yeah.
So you have to have multiple songs that are popular and played, not just in Barbados, but internationally. In other words, you have to have an active repertoire of works or an active catalog of works. you generally should try to control as many of your rights as possible. So the people who will earn the most are persons who have a repertoire of works, of popular works, who get airplay across multiple platforms in multiple territories, and generally control and or own their copyright.
The topic of royalties is vast, so we're going to take a short break. Stay with us. You're watching One on One.
When does a mental health issue become a problem? When should you reach out for help? I'm Krisnan Hurdle, clinical psychologist and certified life coach. Mental health issues interrupt a person's daily functions. An issue becomes a disorder when a person isn't able to carry out their everyday activities like household duties, personal upkeep and hygiene, or interferes with their ability to function socially, to interact with others inside the household, or interferes with their ability to function on the job or carry out other activities. If a person finds themselves needing to self-isolate, losing touch with reality, or having an impaired ability to think, reason, or function, and if this occurs over a period of days, weeks, or months, then it is time that they reach out for help.
Keep it clean, keep it green. Barbadians, we invite you to get involved and play your part as we clean and green Barbados. Come into your community with media launches, bulk waste collection exercises, community engagement sessions, and giveaways. Get on board. Let's keep Barbados clean and green. Beautiful, beautiful Barbados.
And welcome back. We are chatting with the CEO of COSCAP, Dr. Erica Smith. Dr. Smith, before the break, we were discussing the hot button topic of royalties, and you were explaining that most of the time, a lot of artists tend to have some unrealistic expectations in terms of the revenue that they should be generating. Yeah. You mentioned airplay. So royalties and airplay go hand in hand. Explain that process to me.
All right. So how do we know how much someone should get in terms of royalties? First of all, let me be clear, it's not an exact science. And if for it to be exact, it would be too costly. So we apply systems that have been developed. As I told you, this is not a new business, over many years. So there are a lot of international standards that determine how you go about, establishing payments. And you do want to get as accurate as possible. So in the first instance, we look at airplay on radio. We should also be looking at television and cable, but we have to look where royalties are actually earned. So we do get some information from local free-to-air television and from the radio stations that pay royalties. They are obliged to provide us with their logs, their program logs. We get that with, to some success. It's definitely improved over the years. And we also invested in our own system. So for the radio stations that stream, we have a system. It's used by many societies worldwide that tracks those streams and monitors all the music performed. So that's the majority of the information we rely on to know what to pay and to whom to pay. Now, the reality is you don't get 100%. And we don't monitor, or rather we don't apply 100%. We actually use a sample. And we use that because of the sheer volume.
Right.
That sample is based on a statistical model that was developed some time ago by the University of the West Indies. That's what we use. So we don't do it based on our own biases or anything like that. The information is collected from the radio station and from the system we use to monitor online streams, and we apply the parameters of the statistical model. Now, that is used for radio broadcast, music that's played on radio. We also get sometimes some information for free-to-air television, so that goes in as well. And we are able to distribute as well, using that information, the pool of money collected from places like restaurants, hotels, shops, etc. Because people will say, well, how do you know what I'm playing in my restaurant on the 10th of April? We can't know unless you undertake to provide us with that detailed information. But it was recognized that statistically, most of the music played generally, in barber shops or wherever, will be music that's played on radio. So that those monies are pooled and distributed against radio logs. Then you have some other sources, live performances. And this is one of the areas where members who are performing their original music can really help themselves, because we also will look at the performances that are done live. And if the event where these live performances took place was big enough, so we have internal thresholds. So once the license fees reach a certain amount, we will try to pay out specifically the music that was performed live at that event against that money. So it's not pooled. And we do the same for crop over. And again, with crop over, it's really important because this is how we try to ensure that locals in particular are properly paid, right? So you need to submit your live performance information. We will undertake to collect some. We don't have the resources to cover, every event, but members and promoters are able to submit this, and they could do it online.
And this is why it's so important to have that public performance license.
Right. So if there's an event and it isn't licensed, we can't pay out. So, this is why it's really important that the events are licensed and that our members verify that the events have been licensed. Because if they haven't, we can't pay you anything, right? No money in means no money out. And I actually would like to take this opportunity to make a clarification. Often people will ask us, why do I have to pay when I'm already paying the artist? The thing is, if you're having an event with strictly live music, so no DJ, we will only license you for the songwriters and publishers, because you are already paying the performers directly. But if you think about it, whose music are they performing? Maybe some of it is theirs, but even if they own some of the rights, it's not all theirs. And there are all these writers and publishers who wouldn't be paid otherwise. So we would license you only for the writers and publishers. If you are using live and recorded, our tariff would reflect that. We have a detailed schedule of tariffs that varies depending on the type of event, and various factors, such as is there an admission fee, how big is the audience, etc.
Because if you're playing a fair, for instance, versus a fete, the rate would not be the same.
It's totally different. So for something like a fair, it's a flat fee. Tariffs are based on, if you think of it as a pyramid, so at the top of the pyramid with the highest rates is what we call essential music use. So where the music use is directly tied to the generation of revenue. And that's where we will generally charge a percentage of the gate receipts or what have you, because you are making money really based on music use. You have a concert, that's what you're making your money off of. As you come down that pyramid, you have ambience music. So like in restaurants, It is providing a service, it's improving the atmosphere and so on, but it's not as essential as a concert, for example, or for broadcast. And you come to the bottom of that pyramid, you have background music use. So like in a factory or in an office, it's not essential at all to have music. It helps. And the tariff would reflect that. So it's going to be much lower and usually on a flat rate basis.
Going back to the topic of airplay, 2 years ago, the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation made the bold decision to dedicate one of its stations, 94.7 FM, to 100% local content. It's something that you lauded at the time. Has it been having the impact you thought it would have?
I generally support having more local content on radio and television. And for that matter, in our cinemas or wherever, we need to have more local content. In terms of that initiative, yes, I applaud it in the sense that there was a commitment to providing space for local music. Now, broadcasters, how that will affect our members in terms of revenue is that broadcasters pay us based on a percentage of their net advertising revenue. So an increase in net advertising revenue would redound to our members' benefit. So the question would have to be, has the establishment of this radio station, which is playing only local music, had a positive effect on the net advertising revenue? Without that positive effect, it really wouldn't have much of an impact because you now are, it depends on the size of the pie. If by having the local radio station, you have a lot more local content showing up in the program logs overall, maybe they will see more, returns. But ultimately, these efforts will have the greatest impact when you're able to attract advertising. So that's the best way I can answer that. Personally, I really prefer if local music is not segregated from other, forms of music. I would prefer if it was all integrated. So you have your multi-format station or whatever format you have, and you integrate the local music.
But you already have several stations already doing that.
Right. So one of the fears I had was, I must admit, I don't think that has come to pass. Honestly, we still need to properly analyze the logs to see the impact from a performance perspective. But one of the fears I had was that, you kind of relinquish responsibility for local content to this one station. I don't think that's happened, thankfully. But I would say that overall it's a positive initiative. Let's try and ensure that corporate Barbados supports it.
And you did say that the broadcast entities are cooperating with COSCAP a lot better.
Yeah.
Well, you did say that earlier.
Yes, most of them. There's still a couple that we're in court with. We've been in court with for many years. Those that have generally cooperated over the years are still cooperating, and it's a much better picture as far as the provision of program logs are concerned.
Looking at where we are as a country regarding copyright, last year, you were quoted as saying that if Barbados wanted to truly see the development of the cultural and creative industries, authorities needed to get serious about issues surrounding copyright. And at the time, we were speaking to the situation surrounding the late, great musician Jackie Opal, who, as we know, is credited with inventing spooge.
But yes, because we talk a lot about developing our cultural industries, our creative industries, more recently the orange economy. These industries, they are based on the exploitation or the commercialization, or if you want to call it the monetization of copyright primarily. Other IP rights as well, but mainly copyright. So you can't realistically talk about developing these industries unless you also develop an appropriate copyright framework. And a lot of people are very dismissive when you start talking about IP and copyright. I think mainly because we still haven't figured out how to effectively monetize our IP rights. But the reality is, those are the rights that form the basis of these industries, especially in the digital environment, where you're not selling, or licensing tangible content. So more so in this digital environment, we need to ensure we have a functioning IP and specifically copyright framework.
And if you could just put the whole Opel situation in context, because we know the time had elapsed and now his family will not benefit from his work.
Right. So in the situation with Jackie Opel, what that was about was the fact that locally copyright expires after 50 years after death.
Yeah.
Right? So Jackie Opel's work, his recordings, the works he's written are all what we would call now in the public domain. So they're free to use. Yes, the advocacy was done around Jackie Opel, bearing in mind the sentiment around him.
Yes.
But obviously the effect goes far beyond Jackie Opel. Now, 50 years after death sounds like a lot. Globally, the standard has increased to 70 years after death. And in some countries, it's more. To be clear, I don't think copyright should last forever. I absolutely don't agree with that. But I do think we should stay abreast with the international standard. So if the standard is 70 years, I don't think it helps our creators to be stuck with 50 years, right? In most countries, even if they're at 70 years, they will look to see, okay, but this person is Barbadian and they're at 50 years, so their rights will be limited to 50 years. That's how it works. So we are depriving our rights holders. And the case of Jackie Opel, the case of Vincent van Gogh, for that matter, and many others, you have copyright for during your life. Maybe you were able to benefit in a meaningful way while you were alive, but a lot of times the benefit comes much further down the road. And even using more basic examples, let's say with advertising or with a film, you wrote a song today, it isn't particularly popular or anything, but 60 years from now, there may be a movie that song is perfect for, and suddenly it has a life and it's generating more than you would have ever had during your lifetime.
Who benefits?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So this is why, unlike other forms of IP, the life of copyright is, quite long. So we have been lobbying, and we took it up, especially given what happened with Jackie Opel, to try to push for this amendment in our legislation. It hasn't happened yet, but I've been told that it will. So I'm hoping it happens sooner rather than later.
Over the years, the music industry has changed tremendously as a result of major advancements in technology. So let's look at some of the changes, because it's not just technology driven.
Yeah, but It's not just technology driven, but largely technology driven. So we're in the digital age. And as you know, no more CDs really, or vinyl has a niche market,
Yes.
but it's all about streaming. And if we look at what's happened in the region over the last, I would say, 30, 40 years, or even before. So if we go back, we had a thriving industry in the days of vinyl with World. We did very well. And I was told, I can't swear to it, but I was told that at the time, BSNT, which owned the conglomerate, which owned World, that World was their best performing division for a long time. Technology changed, and we had CDs, cassettes, and CDs. With the change in technology, there was it became easier to pirate, right? And it became easier and easier over time. And that destroyed sales, as most people know. And it certainly destroyed sales locally. Unfortunately, the transition into the digital platform of streaming has not been an easy one for the region. And we see this when the global numbers are published, we are way down. It is very, very difficult. So with COVID, during the height of the COVID pandemic, other CMOs were still able to collect, and in fact, their collections increased based on the performance of streaming platforms. In our environment, streaming platforms have, they're not generating anything much. Only recently, within the past 2 years, on a regional level, have we been able to successfully license some of the big international platforms. And even so, I wasn't exactly celebrating, because our members will not earn a lot of money from the regional streaming environment because people don't pay subscriptions.
No.
We still strongly believe that music should be free. So unless people start paying and subscribing to streaming platforms, our numbers will remain depressed. There are some other complications that affect our ability to develop the Caribbean digital music market. I can't go into them now, but I would say that a big issue has to do with our legal/regulatory framework. And we've been lobbying with that as well. But there are a number of challenges. So yes, it's a whole new world, but we still aren't, when I say we, our members, COSCAP too, and organizations in the region, aren't fully equipped to deal with it. In the case of COSCAP, we need to have some changes made to the operating environment.
You mentioned COVID-19 briefly.
Mm-hmm.
How was COSCAP and by extension the artists affected? We know that they weren't performing, there was nothing to attend. Talk to me about COVID-19.
A nightmare, an absolute nightmare. For COSCAP, we ended up with a smaller staff complement. We had started 2020 so ambitiously and optimistically. We have a new building. We had planned some development work where we were going to be able to offer more support to our members. All of that came falling down. We really had to become very agile and responsive. Our intention was simply, we need to work with our clients. We need to show that we empathize, we understand, and we establish systems to demonstrate that. Meaning discounts, concessions, payment plans. We were just all out, and we still are working with our clients. In terms of our membership, 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had 2020 was a very, very difficult year. We had we had so many meetings trying to figure out how are we going to offer support, and we came up with different initiatives. No money was coming in, or very, very little. We went to as low as 25% of our usual income. So with very little money coming in and demands to still assist members, it was a lot of pressure. We did some fixed payments. We made an arrangement with a wholesaler to offer members the opportunity to get groceries and certain things. Yeah. We couldn't help as much as we would have liked, or we couldn't help all of our members. So it was a real balancing act, but we tried our best, to offer whatever support we could.
How much money in royalties does COSCAP pay out on an annual basis?
COSCAP generally pays out about $500,000, sometimes a bit more, but usually about $500,000 in royalties annually. Obviously not during the COVID period, but that is on average. And really, if the market was working the way it should, in other words, we didn't have such a high level of resistance from music users, we estimate that we should be paying at least 3 times more than that.
How do you see the current state of the Barbadian music industry in terms of it being able to move forward given the changes?
The changes since COVID?
Yes.
Like I said, we need to figure out how we're going to make the digital marketplace work for us. We are generally very reliant. When I say we, I'm talking about regional rights holders are very much reliant on live performances. And in terms of royalties, even for us, it's primarily the crop over season that provides the most benefit to our local members. So we don't want to have this limited reliance on just a couple of things. We need to find ways to develop other revenue streams. Obviously, streaming is one. So as I mentioned, we're lobbying for some of the changes we think are required, but we do need to build sensitization and some of the initiatives that were done in other markets to help consumers move from just wanting free music to understanding the value of subscriptions. That will take time. Our artists also need the support, because it's okay to put your music. So outside of what's happening in the region, obviously there's a global market. You can go and sign with an aggregator and get your music on platforms globally. But you need to have the support and investment to ensure people can find that music and that it's on playlists. We need to, even though the growth is happening in the digital market, we do need to also diversify our live performance market. And by that, I mean, we need to get back to the days of live performances in clubs, in restaurants, wherever possible. We need to be offering those showcasing platforms to local artists.
But Dr. Smith, thank you so much for showcasing all that COSCAP does and explaining the important work that you're doing to help protect our artists on the island.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was Dr. Erica Smith, the CEO of the Copyright Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. I am Lisa Lord. We're watching 101. Have yourself a wonderful evening.